Welcome back, fellow knowledge seekers. Ready for part 2 of our deep dive into current affairs for January 15th, 2025.
We've got another jam-packed lineup today.
Perfect for those of you prepping for the UPSC exams.
From international aid missions
to milestones in Indian defense.
So grab your notebooks and let's jump right in.
Okay, let's start with a gesture of goodwill that caught my eye.
Right.
India sending humanitarian aid to Cuba in the wake of Hurricane Raphael.
Yeah.
It's a classic example of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in action. Right. But I'll admit, my knowledge of Cuba doesn't go much beyond cigars and the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Well, you've hit on two key points there, but there's so much more to Cuba than meets the eye.
Okay.
Geographically, it's strategically located right at the crossroads of the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean, making it a vital point in the Caribbean.
I see.
And economically, it might surprise you to learn that Cuba is a major player in the nickel industry, the 9th largest producer globally.
Nickel. Really? I wouldn't have guessed that. I know it's used in things like stainless steel and batteries, but I never pictured Cuba as a nickel powerhouse.
It's one of those hidden gems, so to speak. Now, zooming out to the bigger picture, India and Cuba have had a surprisingly robust relationship for decades. It goes all the way back to 1959, when India was one of the first nations to recognize the new Cuban government, after the revolution, and even during the Cold War. With all its tensions and the nail-biting Cuban Missile Crisis, India and Cuba consistently supported each other on the world stage, particularly at the UN, in fact. Cuba is a staunch supporter of India's bid for a permanent seat on the UN Security Council.
So it's a friendship that has stood the test of time.
Absolutely.
What's interesting to me is that this relationship thrived even when India was officially non-aligned during the Cold War.
Exactly. It speaks volumes about shared values and mutual respect. And this partnership extends to the economic and developmental spheres as well. In 2022-23, bilateral trade between the two countries was valued at around 84 million USD. India exports pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, and textiles, while Cuba sends back tobacco and pharmaceutical products.
Interesting.
But beyond trade, India has been actively contributing to Cuba's development through projects, like setting up an IT center, providing hurricane relief, and sending crucial aid during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Wow.
India has also extended substantial lines of credit to Cuba, amounting to 243 million USD, aimed at boosting their agriculture, food processing, and renewable energy sectors.
Wow, that's a significant investment. Means like India is really committed to supporting Cuba's growth.
Absolutely.
But what about the cultural side of things?
Yeah.
Has Indian culture made any inroads in Cuba?
Oh, absolutely. There's a deep respect for Indian figures like Gandhi, Nehru, and Tagore in Cuba. You can even find a bust of Tagore in Havana, highlighting his literary influence.
Wow.
And if you stroll through Havana today, you'll likely see people practicing yoga or embracing Ayurvedic principles. Even events like International Yoga Day are celebrated with great enthusiasm there.
It's amazing how these cultural threads weave their way across continents. It shows the power of soft power, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's shift our focus now to something a bit closer to home. A moment of pride for India's defense capabilities.
All right.
The Indian Navy just commissioned not one, not two, but 3 brand new warships.
Right.
The Nilgiri, the Surat, and the Vakshir. Now, before I reveal what types of ships these are, I'm curious. Any guesses from our UPSC aspirants out there?
This is a really exciting development, and each of these warships showcases India's commitment to both indigenous technology and a powerful naval presence.
You got that right. Let's break them down one by one. First up, we have the Nilgiri, the lead ship of Project 17A. Think stealth technology, cutting-edge weaponry, and the ability to slip under enemy radar. This frigate is a force to be reckoned with. Then there's the Surat, the 4th and final destroyer in its class under Project 15B. We're talking long-range missiles, advanced air defense systems, and a whole array of indigenous technologies packed into this powerful vessel.
And let's not forget the silent predator of the trio, the Vakshir, the 6th submarine in the Scorpion class, built under Project 75.
Right.
This submarine is designed for underwater warfare, surveillance, and those stealthy special operations you see in the movies. It's incredibly quiet, making it a formidable asset beneath the waves.
Speaking of movies, these warships sound like something straight out of a high-budget action flick. But what I find particularly impressive is the emphasis on indigenous technology. It's a testament to India's growing self-reliance in defense, right?
Absolutely. These additions are more than just individual ships. They represent a strategic vision for India's naval strength. Project 75, for example, is all about expanding India's submarine fleet. And these developments are crucial for safeguarding our maritime interests. In an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape.
So it's not just about the ships themselves. It's about what they represent for India's role in the region and on the global stage. All right, let's switch gears now to something a bit more cerebral. Did you know that January 10th was World Hindi Day?
Yeah.
Not to be confused with Hindi Diwas, which we celebrate in September. World Hindi Day is all about celebrating the global reach and influence of the Hindi language.
It's a day to recognize that Hindi is no longer confined to India's borders. It's becoming a language of communication and cultural expression across continents.
I actually had a friend tell me recently about how they were traveling in Europe and stumbled upon a group of people conversing in Hindi. It really brought home the point that Hindi is making its mark worldwide. But speaking of India, I'm curious about Hindi's status within our own country. I know it's an official language, but could you give our listeners a quick rundown of its constitutional standing?
Of course. Article 343 of the Indian Constitution designates Hindi as the official language of the Union. Alongside English, it's also included in the 8th Schedule, which recognizes 22 languages for official purposes.
So while Hindi holds a prominent position, it's important to remember that India is a land of incredible linguistic diversity, with numerous other languages enriching our cultural fabric.
Precisely. It's a beautiful tapestry of languages, each contributing to the richness and complexity of Indian culture.
Speaking of legacies that resonate today, let's shift our focus to a day of remembrance.
Okay.
January 11th marked the 59th death anniversary of Lal Bahadur Shastri, India's second prime minister.
Right.
He was born on October 2nd, 1904, played a pivotal role in the Indian freedom struggle, and was deeply influenced by Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy.
Shastri was known for his unwavering integrity, humility, and dedication to public service. He truly embodied the spirit of a servant leader, always prioritizing the needs of the nation above his own.
And who can forget his powerful slogan, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, which translates to Hail the Soldier, Hail the Farmer. It perfectly encapsulates India's strength, recognizing the vital contributions of both our armed forces and our agricultural backbone. It's a slogan that's as relevant today as it was back then, especially given ongoing discussions about strengthening our military and supporting our farmers. But before we delve into his legacy, tell me more about his journey to becoming prime minister. What were some of the key positions he held that shaped his leadership?
Shastri's journey was remarkable. He held a variety of ministerial portfolios, including railways, home affairs, and commerce and industry, which provided him with a deep understanding of the challenges and opportunities facing India.
That's fascinating. Holding such diverse roles must have given him a really well-rounded perspective. It's not something you see very often in today's political landscape.
And what's truly admirable is his commitment to accountability. As railways minister, he resigned twice following major train accidents, taking moral responsibility for the incidents. This speaks volumes about his character and his deep sense of duty.
Wow, that's a powerful example of leadership and taking ownership. It makes you wonder how different things might be if more leaders followed that example.
It's definitely something to ponder. But Shastri's legacy extends beyond his personal integrity. His decisive leadership during the 1965 Indo-Pak War solidified his position as a strong and capable leader. He authorized military action to defend Kashmir, demonstrating his unwavering resolve to protect India's territorial integrity.
And then there's the Tashkent Declaration, signed in 1966, shortly before his untimely death. It was a significant moment in Indo-Pak relations. But it's always been shrouded in a bit of mystery, hasn't it?
It certainly has. The circumstances surrounding Shastri's death in Tashkent remain a subject of much debate and speculation even today. It's one of those historical events that leaves you with more questions than answers.
Definitely a topic for a deep dive of its own. Okay, for our next story, we're heading to a part of the world that I'll admit I had to look up on a map. We're talking about Mayotte, and just for kicks, try saying that 5 times fast.
Mayotte. It definitely has a unique ring to it. And geographically speaking, it's just as interesting.
I'm all ears. Where in the world is Mayotte? And why should we care?
Well, Mayotte is part of the Comoros archipelago, nestled in the Mozambique Channel of the Indian Ocean. It's a small island, but here's the kicker. It's the poorest territory in both France and the European Union.
Hold on, France. The EU, my mind is officially blown. I had no idea there was a connection to France. Tell me more.
It's a fascinating story that goes back to colonial times. France colonized Mayotte in 1843 and eventually annexed the entire Comoros archipelago in 1904. But in 1974, when a referendum was held, most of the Comoros Islands voted for independence.
Oh.
Mayotte, however, chose to remain under French administration, a decision rooted in its unique history and ties to France.
It's amazing how these historical events continue to shape the world today. And the fact that Mayotte is the poorest territory in the EU really highlights the disparities that exist, even within a supposedly unified bloc.
Absolutely. And to add to that complexity, Mayotte has been facing a barrage of cyclones lately.
Oh.
Remember Cyclone Cheeto back in December?
I do.
That was the most severe storm to hit the archipelago in 90 years, causing widespread damage and highlighting the growing threat of extreme weather events, likely fueled by climate change.
It's a sobering reminder that even amidst political complexities, the forces of nature can have a profound impact on these vulnerable island communities. But for our next segment, we're shifting gears to a topic that's often shrouded in silence and stigma, especially here in India: hysterectomies.
Right. And we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into current affairs.
Tailor-made for our ambitious UPSC aspirants out there.
That's right.
Today we're focusing on a topic that often sparks hushed conversations:
Especially among women in India.
hysterectomies.
It's a procedure shrouded in a mix of medical necessity and, unfortunately, societal pressures, leading to some concerning trends.
Exactly. We touched upon this briefly in part 1, mentioning how hysterectomy rates are surprisingly high among both low-income agricultural workers and affluent women, but for very different reasons. It's a paradox that raises some serious questions.
It's a complex issue with layers of socioeconomic factors, healthcare access, and sadly, even potential exploitation within the system.
So let's unpack this for our listeners.
Especially those gearing up for the UPSC exams where such topics can pop up.
For those who might not be familiar, what exactly is a hysterectomy and when is it medically justified?
A hysterectomy is the surgical removal of the uterus, or womb. It's a major procedure, and it's typically recommended only as a last resort when other treatment options haven't worked or when there are serious medical conditions involved.
So,
Conditions like fibroids, endometriosis, abnormal bleeding that doesn't respond to other treatments, certain types of cancer, or severe chronic pelvic pain are some of the reasons a doctor might recommend a hysterectomy.
so it's definitely not a decision to be taken lightly. It sounds like it's a pretty big deal, both physically and emotionally. But you mentioned concerning trends. What's setting off alarm bells when it comes to hysterectomies in India?
Well, the National Family Health Survey, or NFHS4, revealed a higher prevalence of hysterectomies among both ends of the socioeconomic spectrum. But for different reasons, among agricultural workers, particularly in rural areas, you have a convergence of factors at play.
Okay.
Think poor hygiene, limited access to healthcare, and awareness about menstrual health, and the physically demanding nature of their work.
It's heartbreaking to think that these women are facing such challenges simply because of their socioeconomic status. It's a stark reminder of the healthcare disparities that exist in our country.
Absolutely. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have affluent women who have the financial resources and access to healthcare. But sometimes there's a perception that a hysterectomy is a convenient solution to manage menstrual issues or even as a form of contraception.
That's a scary thought. A hysterectomy is a major surgery with potential long-term consequences. So the idea that it might be seen as a quick fix is quite concerning.
And adding to that concern is the potential for financial incentives under schemes like the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, or RSBY.
Right.
There have been cases where healthcare providers might be motivated to perform hysterectomies for financial gain, even when they might not be medically necessary.
That raises some serious ethical red flags. It's a reminder that even with well-intentioned schemes, there's always a potential for misuse and exploitation. But are there any specific examples or case studies that illustrate this issue?
Unfortunately, yes. A stark example is the Bid district in Maharashtra, where there have been reports of an unusually high number of hysterectomies among female sugarcane workers.
Sugarcane workers. That sounds incredibly strenuous. What are the factors at play in that particular case?
These women often face grueling working conditions, lack access to proper sanitation and hygiene facilities, and are often subject to societal pressures that discourage them from taking breaks or seeking medical help for menstrual problems.
Oh, wow.
All of this can lead to a higher incidence of gynecological issues, which might be misdiagnosed or treated inappropriately, resulting in unnecessary hysterectomies.
It paints a rather bleak picture, highlighting how interconnected socioeconomic factors, cultural norms, and healthcare disparities can put these women at risk.
It's a multifaceted issue that requires a multifaceted approach. We need greater awareness, education, and most importantly, ethical practices within the healthcare system to safeguard women's health.
Absolutely. Now, moving on from this rather heavy topic, let's turn our attention to a piece of news that brings a glimmer of hope. Odisha has just joined the Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, or ABPMJAY for short, becoming the 27th state to implement this ambitious healthcare scheme.
This is a significant step towards achieving universal healthcare coverage in India, as Odisha joins the ranks of states committed to providing accessible and affordable healthcare to their citizens.
And it's particularly interesting because Odisha already has its own state-level health insurance scheme, the Gopabandhu Jan Arogya Yojana, or GJAY. I'm curious, how will these two schemes, ABPMJAY and GJY, work together? What does it mean for the people of Odisha?
It's a convergence of resources and reach. With the integration of ABPMJY, the coverage and benefits for eligible families in Odisha are set to expand significantly. Under this combined initiative, each family will be covered for up to Rs 5 lakh per year for secondary and tertiary care hospitalization. Wow. And there's an additional Rs 5 lakh coverage specifically for women, ensuring they have a stronger financial safety net for their healthcare needs.
Wow, that's a substantial amount. It must be a huge relief for families knowing they have that kind of financial support for medical emergencies.
Absolutely. And we're not just talking about a small number of beneficiaries here. Over 1.03 crore families in Odisha alone are set to benefit from this expanded coverage.
That's incredible. It really highlights the scale and impact of this initiative. But for those who might not be familiar with ABPMJAY, could you give us a quick overview of what makes this scheme so unique?
Imagine this, the world's largest health assurance scheme, covering a staggering 45% of India's population. That's the scale of ABPMJAY. We're talking about providing essential health coverage to over 12 crore families, ensuring they have access to quality health care without facing financial hardship.
That's a game changer in a country where healthcare costs can be a major burden for families. What kind of medical services and procedures are covered under this scheme?
ABPMJAY covers a wide range of medical procedures across various specialties, including cardiology, orthopedics, oncology, and more. It also covers pre-existing conditions, ensuring that people with existing health issues don't face discrimination or denial of coverage.
It's heartwarming to see such a comprehensive approach to healthcare coverage. It must give people a sense of security, knowing that they can access quality treatment without worrying about the financial implications.
Absolutely. And there's another aspect of ABPMJAY that's worth highlighting. The scheme has a vast network of over 30,000 empaneled hospitals, both public and private.
So people have a choice in where they receive treatment. And it ensures wider accessibility, right?
Precisely. It aims to bridge the gap between urban and rural healthcare facilities, giving people in remote areas access to quality healthcare closer to home.
It's truly encouraging to see such initiatives, aimed at making quality healthcare accessible to all Indians, regardless of their location or financial situation.
And it's not just about expanding access, it's about ensuring that the most vulnerable sections of society are protected. One of the most heartwarming aspects of the scheme is that it now includes senior citizens aged 70 and above who are eligible for free treatment under ABPMJAY.
That's fantastic news for senior citizens, who often face higher healthcare costs and might not have the financial means to afford expensive treatments. But as we wrap up this segment, I have to ask, there are a couple of states that haven't yet adopted ABPMJAY.
You're right. Delhi and West Bengal are the two states that haven't yet implemented the scheme.
I wonder what the reasons behind that are. It'd be interesting to delve into the factors that might be influencing their decisions. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. The dynamics of healthcare policy and implementation can be quite complex, and it's always insightful to understand the various perspectives and challenges involved.
Well, that wraps up our discussion on this positive development in India's healthcare landscape. But as our listeners know, current affairs is a constantly evolving field.
And we're here to guide you through the twists and turns, providing insightful analysis and making sure you're well equipped, especially if you're aiming for those UPSC exams.
Speaking of intriguing twists and turns, our next story takes us to a remote island with a fascinating history and a strategically important location, Diego Garcia.
It's a place that often flies under the radar, but its story is deeply intertwined with geopolitics, colonial legacies, and international relations. And we're back with the final part of our deep dive into current affairs for January 15th, 2025.
We've covered some really complex topics today, from international aid to healthcare to defense.
Touching on everything from the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean.
And for this last part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to an issue we touched on earlier, hysterectomies in India.
It's a topic that's so important to understand, especially given the trends we see in the data.
Exactly. We were talking about those surprisingly high hysterectomy rates, both among low-income agricultural workers and affluent women, but for totally different reasons.
It's a paradox that reveals a lot about socioeconomic factors, healthcare access, and sadly, the potential for exploitation within the system itself.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar with the procedure, can you explain what a hysterectomy is? And when is it medically necessary?
Sure, a hysterectomy is the surgical removal of the uterus. Sometimes it's the entire uterus, sometimes just a part of it.
Yeah.
It's a major surgery that can have both physical and emotional consequences, so it's usually recommended only as a last resort, when other treatment options haven't worked, or in very specific medical situations.
It sounds like a serious decision. What kind of medical situations would justify a hysterectomy?
Well, there are several conditions that might lead a doctor to recommend it.
Okay.
For example, you have severe fibroids, those non-cancerous growths in the uterus. They can cause heavy bleeding, pain, and other complications. Endometriosis is another one, where uterine tissue grows outside of the uterus. That can also cause debilitating pain and fertility issues.
I see.
Then there are cases of abnormal bleeding that don't respond to other treatments, certain types of cancer affecting the reproductive organs, and very severe chronic pelvic pain that really impacts a woman's quality of life.
So those are some serious medical reasons. But you mentioned concerning trends. What's raising those red flags when it comes to hysterectomies in India?
It all comes back to the data from the National Family Health Survey, or NFHS4. It showed a higher prevalence of hysterectomies at both ends of the socioeconomic spectrum, but for very different reasons.
Exactly.
Among agricultural workers, especially those in rural areas, there's this convergence of factors that creates a higher risk of needing a hysterectomy.
You're talking about the difficult working conditions, the lack of proper sanitation and health care, and the societal pressures they face.
Exactly. These women are often doing incredibly physically demanding work. They may not have access to good hygiene facilities. And there can be cultural barriers that prevent them from seeking timely medical care.
It's heartbreaking to think that women's health might be jeopardized because of their socioeconomic situation. It highlights a real need for better healthcare infrastructure in rural areas, and for more awareness campaigns about women's health issues.
Absolutely. But then on the other end of the spectrum, among more affluent women, the problem isn't lack of access to healthcare. It's potentially overuse of medical interventions.
So it's not about not being able to afford healthcare. It's about potentially having too much access.
It's about the possibility of unnecessary procedures being performed, maybe for convenience, maybe because of misconceptions about the procedure, or even driven by financial incentives within the healthcare system.
That's really concerning. To think that a woman's health could be at risk because of profit motives or a lack of proper information and counseling. Are there any specific cases or examples of this?
There are, sadly. The Bede district in Maharashtra is a prime example.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
There have been reports of an unusually high number of hysterectomies performed on women who work in the sugarcane fields.
Those are incredibly demanding jobs.
Exactly. These women are doing grueling labor. They often lack access to good sanitation, and they may face societal pressures that prevent them from taking breaks or seeking medical help when they have menstrual problems.
It's a complex situation.
It is.
It really shows how socioeconomic factors, cultural norms, and healthcare disparities can all intersect to make these women more vulnerable.
It underscores the need for greater awareness, more sensitivity from healthcare providers, and a real commitment to ethical practices within the healthcare system.
Well said. And on that note, folks, we've come to the end of our deep dive into current affairs for January 15th, 2025. We've explored a wide range of topics today, from international aid and defense advancements to those complex issues surrounding women's healthcare here in India.
We've seen how India's role on the global stage is evolving and how those global events are intertwined with domestic challenges.
It's been a thought-provoking journey.
And hopefully a valuable one for our listeners, especially for those of you preparing for the UPSC exams.
But even beyond exams, staying informed is crucial for all of us. It's about being engaged citizens, understanding the complexities of the world around us,
and contributing to a more informed and equitable society.
So until next time, Keep those brains buzzing. Stay curious.
And keep learning.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your fellow knowledge seekers.